It is Tuesday, April 25th, 2023, and call the meeting of the Senate Elections Committee to order. And a quorum is now present. Today we're going to be considering the confirmation of 2 members of the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board, and as well as 1 bill. And what we're going to plan to do is we're going to hear from the nominees for the Campaign Finance Board, and then hear their comments, and then vote after the second person has been heard from. And Senator Flynn is the first one. And Senator Flynn, will you please join us at the table, introduce yourself for the record, and give us a presentation on your background.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for finding time for us this morning. I am Carol Flynn, former state senator, years ago, as it turns out, but I did serve with you and other members of your committee back in the day, so it isn't that long ago, I guess. As I view our job at the Campaign Finance Board, it's to implement the Chapter 10A, and you guys write the law, and our job is to see that it's administered appropriately. We deal with campaign finances for parties and political committees, and we also handle the economic status reports, and we also keep track of the lobbyists. The lobbyist information that's provided to the public has been less than informative, and so we've worked for the last several years to put together some legislation which I think is moving through the process this year, and we hope it will provide the public with more information on exactly what the lobbyists are working on. We know how much they spend on lobbying, but it isn't exactly clear in the reports where it's going or what it's for. Other than that, I don't think I have anything new to offer. You may have some questions, and I'd be happy to respond.
Thank you, Senator Flynn. Any questions or discussion from the members? Thank you, Senator.
My pleasure.
And we'll bring up Mr. Rashid, Faris Rashid. Please join us at the table. Introduce yourself for the record and continue with your discussion of yourself and background.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, and good morning to the members of the committee. My name is Faris Rashid. I'm a partner at Green Espel, which is a law firm in Minneapolis. I've been a lawyer by profession my entire life since I graduated law school. I won't repeat what Member Flynn said about the Campaign Finance Board. I agree with her comments and the good work that she highlighted. I'll just add one other thought, which is I've served for several years now on the board, and it genuinely makes me proud to be a Minnesotan. Service on the board has been deeply rewarding. I think one of my favorite parts of the role are the deliberations we have about potential violations of campaign finance laws and lobbying disclosures. We have disagreements, but they're genuine disagreements and they're in good faith. And I think our debates, our arguments, our discussions help us reach better decisions. There's no gamesmanship, it's very collegial. So I very much enjoy the sort of lively discussions that we have together, knowing that even though we may disagree from time to time, we're all genuinely trying to reach the right end result. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rashid. Any questions from the members? Any discussion? Senator Westlin will move the reappointment for Senator Flynn to the Minnesota Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board. And I believe, do we take a roll?
It's up to, you can do a voice vote.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The appointment is confirmed. And Senator Westlin will moves the recommendation of reappointment for Mr. Rashid to the Minnesota Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you. Mr. Rashid, you are now reappointed. Congratulations, Mr. Rashid, and congratulations, Senator Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members.
This morning we have Senate File 3230 presented by Senator Westlin. And we will have Senator Westlin take there she is, take the testifier table. And Senator Westlin, I believe you have the A3 delete all amendment,
I do, Mr. President.
as well as an A8 amendment. So we'll take the A3 amendment first. Would you
Yes,
like to
Mr.
give a
President.
brief description of that amendment?
Yes, Mr. President. So since the time that the original language in the bill was introduced, we've been having a lot of conversations with stakeholders and others. And so the A3 amendment makes a few tweaks to the original language, and it does begin to put the bill in any event in the order that I would like it to be in, and the A8 will complete that process, Mr. President. Spent too much time on the floor yesterday.
Senator Westlin, you'd like to incorporate the A8 into the A3, is that correct?
That's correct.
Great, well, we'll do that. Any questions from the committee? All in favor of the A3 author's amendment as amended by the A8 amendment? Well, first, we'll incorporate the A8 into the A3. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, nay. Okay, now, and I'm sorry, the motion is adopted, and now we'll do the A3 author's amendment as amended by the A8 amendment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, nay. No. The motion is adopted. Senator Westlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members. I appreciate the opportunity to present this bill to you today. It's a bill that we've, again, been spending a lot of time on since one of our committee hearings, where we passed out of this committee a bill that simply raised the threshold to become a major party in the state. And I listened to the comments of members of this committee, and I certainly listened to the comments and testimony of folks who came in. And I thought there is perhaps a better way for us to get to our stated objective in any rate of supporting party integrity, the rights of parties to vet their own candidates, and to make sure that the folks that are on the ballot actually have gone through some sort of process through the party. So what this bill does, if you look at Section 1, it talks about major party candidates, and it states that a candidate who seeks a nomination of a major political party for partisan office must submit with their affidavit of candidacy a major party petition meeting the requirements outlined, or certification by the chair of that party that the candidate is eligible. And what we're providing an opportunity for candidates to get onto that primary ballot in a couple of different ways. If candidates go to an endorsing convention, and on any ballot on that convention, they get at least 30% of the vote, they would be eligible to be certified by the chair of the party as being eligible to run under the major party banner. We also wanted to provide an opportunity, however, for folks who either didn't meet that threshold or for whatever reason chose not to go through that endorsing convention process. And so there is a petition process outlined here in this bill that allows folks to essentially bring forward a petition that meets the threshold requirements outlined in statute. That's another way that a person can get on the ballot as part of that party's banner. I think when we're looking at a couple of things here, one of the problems we are trying to solve for here is spoilers, people who decide to file under a party, and I think it's happened to all of our parties at one point or another, that someone files under a party banner that really isn't a bona fide candidate of that party, and they operate as a spoiler. At the same time, we also want to encourage, as third parties do form in our state, we want to provide and encourage party building, where they are actually creating a structure to help them become a party that functions like a party, that has conventions, that has local grassroots organizing. And in my view, I think that the language that I've come up with the help of staff, with feedback from the Secretary of State, with feedback from parties. I understand we have a couple of folks testifying today. I'm not sure whether they will support or not this amendment, or this bill. But this really was an attempt to try to come up with a little bit more elegant solution to the problem we were trying to solve for, while at the same time absolutely embracing the notion of democracy, of supporting democracy. And I think that this bill does that. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I am happy to stand for questions, but I do understand we have a couple of folks who will be testifying, and then I will be happy to, as best as possible, answer any questions that members have.
Thank you, Senator Westlin. Let's move to testimony now. I believe we have two testifiers that have signed up to testify, and we'll entertain the testifiers for 2 minutes each to make time for the member discussion. I have the first name here is Chip Tagan from the Libertarian Party of Minnesota. Please identify yourself for the record and continue with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Chip Tagan, and last May, I attempted to run for Secretary of State as a Libertarian, and thus I can speak to how petitioning works in practice. Thank you, Senator Westlin, for including language to let us use letter-sized paper. This is my petition from last May. With only 2 weeks to earn our way onto the ballot, it helps to remove any unnecessary friction. Most stores don't carry legal-size paper. Personal printers don't have trays for this size paper, and it's time-consuming to feed sheets one at a time, if you can figure out how to do that. And it broke my heart when well-intentioned volunteers wasted hours of time collecting signatures on letter-sized paper, even though they were given a template that was legal-sized. With this common sense reform, all of these needless troubles can go away, so thank you. The A3 amendment, unlike the original language, would mandate by statute that petitions must be prepared on paper. Adopting this limitation would foreclose the ability of the Secretary of State to revise his rules to permit the option for people to sign electronically, which I believe is required under the Americans with Disabilities Act. For the 2020 election, you may recall, the state instituted electronic petitioning to address the challenges posed by COVID. The state must now extend this proven reasonable accommodation permanently. It should have done so in the last election. I encountered many households with COVID. Some would kindly ask, can he come back a week later? But what about people with permanent disabilities? I distinctly remember meeting 3 legally blind voters. Under current laws, I'm permitted to assist them to fill out the form. But they should have the dignity of filling out that form on their own. And I have no business, as a stranger, asking them to tell me their age. Please revert to the original language in SF 3230 and help us work with the Secretary of State to craft new rules that comply with the ADA. If I may continue, Minnesota prides itself on leading the nation in voter turnout. If the legislature is going to make it virtually impossible for there to be more than 2 major parties in the state, then you owe it to the voters to make it viable for more minor party candidates to get on the ballot through petitioning, and I might add, with this bill, for the major party candidates to get on through petitioning as well. I urge this committee to take a look at Arizona's eQual system, that's E, capital Q, UAL, for registered voters to log on to the Secretary of State's website to sign candidate nominating petitions. It's secure, it's convenient, exactly the criteria you should follow to make Minnesota a leader too. My last comment pertains especially to voters and candidates in greater Minnesota. The 2-week collection window is tough for any of us, but it's exceedingly difficult for those to collect signatures in rural areas in that time frame. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Taken.
Mr. Chair, could I just respond briefly?
Sure. Senator Westlin.
Mr. Tagan, I appreciate your remarks, and I will be happy to consider that, and I would certainly love to have some more conversations with you. I think you raised some good issues. I'd like to have some more conversations just to sort of take this out to its conclusion, but I do appreciate you raising these issues today and your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taken. And just for the committee to understand, we are laying this bill over for possible inclusion, so there is some opportunity to make minor changes.
Just laying it over.
We're just laying it over, yes. Okay. We also have Mr. Travis Bull-Johnson on the list for testifying. Is Mr. Johnson here?
Yes, he's on Zoom.
Yes, sir.
He's on Zoom. Okay. All right. Gotcha. Mr. Johnson, please identify yourself for the record and continue with your testimony.
All right, first of all, my name is Travis Johnson. I would like to thank the committee for allowing me to testify today. I would also like to start off by apologizing to the senator who's putting this bill forward. As I testified in these last 2 hearings, I actually left there thinking I wasted my time. By her looking for another avenue to address the concerns of the committee, rather than just solely go on that 10% for a major party status, I really appreciate that effort, and I do want to thank her and apologize for my thinking otherwise. Originally, I was coming into this with the thought of opposing this bill, but after putting it in the context for ranked choice voting, I now strongly support this bill. I think it will be very efficient, very important for this to go through, as not to clutter the ballots when we do get to ranked choice voting. We've seen what happens in Minneapolis with their version of ranked choice voting, where you have 8 to 10 candidates from one party, and when it comes down to debating, the third parties or the other candidates never get a chance to get on stage because they're filled with the candidates from those two major parties. I do have one boon I would like to ask. With the apparent looking like ranked choice voting will go forward, I would ask that the language from the petitions requiring somebody to take an oath that they will not participate in a primary be removed, because with ranked choice voting, there will be no more primaries, and I feel that leaving that language on there would just lead to further confusion. I also went through the petition process last election here in rural Minnesota, and I do agree with Chip. I mean, when you're talking about petitioning here in rural Minnesota, it is a world of difference between me trying to collect 1,000 signatures door to door when your houses are a mile away, compared to when you can go through one block within the cities and talk to 1,000 people. We don't have that luxury in rural Minnesota. It costs me a lot more money in gas just to try to get those signatures. So anything we can do to help address that issue would be very much appreciated, because right now the current law does feel like it discriminates those in rural Minnesota from participating to the maximum. If I have time, one last thing I would like to address is, when I was picking up my signatures last year, one of the issues I had was I was actually having people try to take photographs of the petitions as I was collecting it, and those photographs were then reported to me have been used to go and harass the people who signed my petitions. I did not appreciate that. We made some public comments of it at that time, but we do need to, I feel we do need to do something to protect those who do sign our petitions, to prevent them from being harassed by committees of the major parties, who is accused of doing the harassment. Thank you very much for your time, and again, I appreciate the senator's effort to find an alternate, less obstructive answer to your concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And what I have to say is that your last testimony actually improved the bill. So we're looking at anything we can do to improve our bills, improve the work that we do in this committee. And I guess I am a little bit distressed by anyone who would harass someone just because they signed a petition. That's not the way Minnesotans should act. So we do want to make sure that that doesn't happen with any kind of movements that we can do. So thank you very much for your testimony. And do we have questions for the testifiers from the committee? Senator Grant.
Mr. Chair, you mentioned we're going to lay this bill over. So you said this originally was an information hearing, and then you changed it to an official hearing, which you're going to lay it over. Lay it over for what? And so either the next path is rules that you intend to carry it independently, or you just plan to amend it tomorrow to one of your election policy bills. What's the intent? Because there aren't many vehicles left.
Yes.
So you must know it's your bill.
At this point, it's just going to be laid over. We're not sure what bill it could be amended into. I think our intention is to get it into something that will be considered on the floor.
Okay, Mr. Chair, election bills are tomorrow. So I don't see other election bills after that, but I appreciate the input. Mr. Chair, can we move on to questions then?
I'm sorry, pardon me?
Can we move on to questions?
Sure. Yes, Senator Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Westlin, you mentioned the objective of it was to eliminate spoilers, and that it was a problem. I think everybody's identified challenges, those that seek just ballot access and those challenges. But what I haven't heard is that it's a problem for the voters, because I think they do want more access and some choice. But when you have the major party status in this particular one, I'm not sure granting a state party chair the type of power that bill appears to do. And so I got just a couple questions. So when we talk about the amendments and the primary ballot access, it lists the seeking the endorsement, we got that. Could a state party chair, it says they must meet either an endorsement or have 30% or a petition. And so does that carry through only for the primary election, not the general? So if a primary, well, I guess it could predetermine, right, if the state party chair. In this case, it looks like, the way it's written, the state party chair could eliminate the primary because they have a single endorsed candidate. If the state party chair agrees with that, we've left it open that the state party chair could also submit or certify someone who achieved 30% or greater, but not the threshold to be fully endorsed, or someone who submitted a petition. So this leaves the total power of a state party chair to, appears to be, it could override an endorsement from the party by including the other names or other people who met the criteria of 30% or petition. Is that correct?
Mr.
Senator
Chair and
Westlin.
Senator, I'm not entirely certain I follow the question. So parties have the right to determine who their candidates are and often do so through an endorsement process. Again, what this does is if a person does reach the threshold for endorsement, they would be listed on the ballot and they would be listed first. But there may be other candidates who go to a convention who do reach that 30% or significant threshold. And so then this is addressing a primary situation. And so what it's saying is that if somebody wants to go file an affidavit of candidacy to run as a Republican or a Democrat or a Libertarian, whatever, they can do that one of two ways. The chair has to certify, if there's been an endorsing convention and there have been candidates who meet those criteria, endorsed or 30%, the chair must certify and provide that candidate a letter of certification, which that candidate then files with their affidavit of candidacy. However, because we support democracy, there may be people who didn't get that 10% threshold, or 30%. There may be people who, for whatever reason, decide not to go to the convention. We've certainly seen that in the DFL party. We've had people who just decide not to go to the convention. Parties like their process. And so we do provide an alternative to get onto the ballot that has some hurdle to get over, but it's not an onerous hurdle, and it requires that a person get the required signatures from voters in their district. So I think that what that says is if you aren't able to meet that threshold on your petition from voters in your district, you're probably not a viable candidate. But we do want to give that opportunity for people to say, I would like to run as a Democrat, I would like to run as a Republican, I didn't meet the threshold at my party process, but I still want to take a shot at this. If I can get the required number of votes on the petition, I can have my name on that primary ballot under that party's banner. And so I'm sorry, Senator Coran, I hope that was sort of getting to your question, but if not, I'm sure you'll let me know.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you, Senator Westlin and Senator Coran. And Mr. Tagan, could you potentially return to the audience if you could? We really don't want to give you the leg up on answering questions here, but if anybody does ask for your input, certainly you can return. So thank you. Senator Coran, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Westlin. So if a state party chair has a role for only in certifying somebody who either achieves the endorsement or somebody who meets the 30% threshold, the state party chair does not have any role in somebody who seeks ballot access through petition. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Senator Westlin.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Senator Westlin. So it looks like in subdivision 2, it says a state party chair must only provide certification for somebody who's met the endorsement. That's a qualifying criteria, but it also lists the 30%. Can a state party chair, well, the 30% makes them eligible for the state party chair's certification. Can a state party chair choose to not submit certification for the endorsed candidate?
Senator Westlin.
No, Senator Cran. The party chair must certify anyone who's received the endorsement, and they must certify anyone who attended the convention and on any ballot received at least 30%. So this isn't discretionary, because I think I understand the nature of your question is you get a party chair who says, I don't like that candidate, I'm not going to certify them. The purpose of this is to say, yes, you actually must certify that candidate.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Cran,
I'm struggling, and maybe council can provide us, but I don't see where it says, it still appears that those are still the only two entities that are eligible for certification, but I don't see that the endorsement takes precedent over the 30% criteria. To me, as I read it, it just shows that both are eligible, and I don't see anything that dictates that they must at least submit or certify the endorsed candidate. And they also then have the option. So we would then insert a state party chair who could then decide to create the primary when the voters in that particular area or region successfully endorse their candidate. And so to me, that would put undue power into that particular person within a state party.
Senator Grant, I believe our A8 has answered that question. Perhaps council can point out the specific words that take care of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Coran. If you look at the A8 lines 1 through 3 and to 1.8, it will amend section 2 of the A3 amendment to say a chair of a major political party must provide certification to a candidate if the candidate has sought endorsement and has at least 30% or received the party endorsement. So the chair is required to give a certification to any of the candidates that meet either of those requirements.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Grant.
Ms. Stengel, again, I still only read it as either are eligible and the party chair still has options.
Mr. Chair and members,
Ms. Stengel.
the chair doesn't have discretion with the A8 amendment. They must provide a certification to any candidate who has either met that 30% threshold or has received endorsement, which means they might be issuing multiple certifications to multiple candidates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so Ms. Stengel, then you clarified that they must certify both of them that met. So we're statutorily facilitating a primary.
Ms. Stengel.
Mr. Chair, that's my understanding of the language.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ms. Stengel, and I appreciate it. That's still, that to me, you would artificially insert a primary outside of the voter as well, or the endorsement process, and I still see that being a challenge. They would still then have ballot access if they choose, if you prescribe that in petition, and to me, I guess either option doesn't work for me. Gives the state party too much power, and then in both cases it removes the will of the people who have worked towards that endorsement process. So I still have a challenge, and I'll yield for other questions.
Mr. Chair, can I respond briefly to that?
Senator Westlin.
There's nothing in this that requires the candidate to file for office. And so basically, if somebody goes to the convention and they don't get the endorsement, but they've gotten 30 or 40% on the vote, that candidate may make a determination that they think they're viable and they may choose to run in the primary, and if they do, they are allowed to run under the party banner. And so there may certainly be a number of situations where someone will just decide that they're going to abide by the endorsement. And so I understand what you're saying, but again, it's up to the candidate to decide whether or not they want to file for office.
Mr. Chair, follow up with that, Senator Westlin. So then the petition process is to petition to run under what brand? Any brand?
So the petition.
Senator
Because you just described if, in order to run under there's alternatives if they run under or if they choose at the 30% threshold, that the chair must provide that name and submit it, and then that person has to decide to move forward if they want to run under that banner. That was your statement, run as a Republican. Does the petition process then also allow you to run as a Republican?
Senator Westlin.
Mr. Chair, Senator Cran, yes, the major party petition would allow someone who either didn't get the threshold or just didn't participate in the endorsement process. They can petition to be on the primary ballot if they meet the requirements for petitioning on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Grant. Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill raises a lot of questions. My experience has been that the election process and the endorsing process is the best when it's closest to the public making decisions, and not necessarily a party official putting some kind of special endorsement that could affect the will of those endorsing a candidate at an endorsing convention. This bill, it appears, gives added power to a party chair. I can foresee some examples. I've been active in Republican politics for over 40 years. And sometimes we select, hopefully, a really effective party chair. Other times, not so much. And they have their own personal collection of issues that cause them to prejudge candidates. They have their favorites. They are disgusted that certain people are endorsed and others are not. And depending on who that party chair is, I can see where they might refuse a certification of an endorsed candidate in this case. Senator Westlin is shaking her head no on me, so we'll give her a chance. But I am concerned, and for that matter, if a party chair is committed to endorse a candidate or to certify a candidate, then why do we need this? I guess that's the big question. Also, I noticed on page 8, line 8, the chair of the major political party must list candidates in descending order. That's for a ballot. Now, didn't we just decide a few days ago that we have to alternate the order of candidates on a ballot? I think that might have been your bill, Senator Westlin. So now we seem to have a special descending order. We were told that the candidates on the top of the list have a slight advantage. That's why we recognized an alternating order on a ballot. So why are we doing it in this manner? It seems like we go in one direction one day and we go in another direction the other day. This is pretty serious. I believe that getting endorsed by the party officials that go to a precinct caucus, that bother to show up, remember that phrase, democracy belongs to those who show up, are the ones that are entrusted with endorsing. And we did the precinct caucus process. We changed that in the late 1950s, I believe, and we wanted to get away from the big money influence in the 1950s of big money selecting who's going to run for office, and we wanted to avoid that as a state. That's why we went to a precinct caucus. That's why we rely on that. We get a better cross-section. We get a better will of the public, of those willing to turn out. This alters that selection unless you trust the chair of a major political party. So I'm very concerned about some of the elements in this bill. What happens if? I've noticed that at least in Minneapolis, there could be multiple candidates running, let's say, for mayor. 20-plus candidates. If you had 4 or 5 of those candidates seek endorsement and you had a hung endorsement convention, and because no one could exceed 30%, let alone 60, what happens then? Does a party chair, who do they put in that descending order on the ballot? Number one, is there anyone who gets that chairist certification from a party chair if you don't receive that 30%? And if you don't get 30%, does that negate the opportunity for you to put yourself on a primary ballot? It's very easy to conceive that there's 4 to 5 candidates could get 28, 27%. Others could get 21 or 22% and never exceed that magical 30%. So I think there's a lot of analysis, and the exercise of hypotheticals should really be exercised in this before we pass the bill forward. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Westlin.
So much there. Hi, Senator Limmer. Thank you so much for your remarks. And I just want to sort of crystallize things again. This is addressing partisan races. So the nonpartisan races, that's that hypothetical and scenario that would not actually apply here. The parties have developed their own internal processes. And I'd like to clarify that there is what we're doing here, and then there are what internal parties are going to do in terms of their rules, their endorsement process, who gets to run under the banner of their party. And this bill actually really does support that grassroots process and that grassroots party building. And I think especially, I mentioned earlier that for our third parties that are coming up who are trying to achieve major party status, and even our minor parties, it encourages them to actually do some party building, grassroots organizing, to have things like conventions, to make sure that they are building that base of support that they hope to have, and also so that they actually have a bona fide convention and endorsing process by which their candidates are vetted. And that goes for the GOP, the Republican Party, and any other party that may achieve major party status. We want to make determinations for themselves who gets to be their candidate under their banner. And as I had mentioned earlier, there's been shenanigans in years that it's probably happened to both the GOP and the Democrats, where somebody runs under a particular party banner who really is not a member of that party, doesn't support that party, but it's just a way to sort of mess with the electoral process. So we're not interfering with internal party politics. What we are saying, Mr. Chair and Senator Limmer, is that the party chair actually does have to certify anyone who's achieved the endorsement, and they have to certify anyone who attended the convention and on any ballot received at least 30% of the vote any vote at that convention. That doesn't mean that those candidates have to run, but if they choose to run, the point here is that they've gone through a process. They have participated in that party's process to determine who their candidates will be. And I think my last remark would be that this and I can't remember exactly which point you were making or which question you had, Senator Limmer, so I apologize, but this applies to a primary situation and not to the general election. So I hope that that has at least responded in part to some of your comments or questions, and I'm certainly happy to answer any additional questions. But again, I think the intention here is to do a couple of things. I think it is to provide a more elegant response to the challenge of spoilers, but also, and perhaps more importantly going forward, to really encourage parties to develop an actual process to build their party, to build a base, to have caucuses, to have grassroots organizing, to develop a candidate base and a bench, to have an endorsing convention where people come through and they're vetted by the party that they claim to align with. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair.
Follow-up, Senator Limmer.
Thank you. Senator Westlin, in the event that a filing for office, can a candidate be on a primary ballot in this manner without ever running for endorsement at a party endorsing convention?
Senator Limmer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Westlin, Senator Limmer.
I'm sorry,
Mr. Chair,
Senator Westlin.
Senator Limmer.
Yeah.
I know it's hard to distinguish between the two of us. We are very much alike. Senator Limmer, that's the petition process. So as I mentioned, we've certainly in our party had folks who've decided not to forego the endorsement process. So the other way then to get on the ballot and run as a Republican or as a Democrat would be through the petition process. It still allows that person access to the ballot if they can meet the threshold criteria. So there's a little bit of a hurdle that they have to get over, but if they can obtain the necessary signatures from voters in their district, they are able then to run under that major party label, but they do have to go through a petition process. So there are two ways to access the ballot. Senator Limmer.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Limmer, follow-up.
Right now, in order to be a candidate for even a major party endorsement, running for a primary, all you have to do is put $100 down. You could also seek out a number of petitions to avoid the $100 fee. But a lot of people use that kind of as a protest also. They don't like the candidates, they don't like the party, but they're going to make a point. They want to be invited maybe to debates. They want to be considered by the public. Putting them through a forced petition drive in order to participate in a democracy with a major party, I just find to be cumbersome. I think it requires them to do a lot more work. I think a democracy should be easy to participate in. The more easy it is, I think we get a richer, more dynamic exercise. And why would it be so difficult, and why is it so egregious to allow a candidate to plink down their $100 and be on the ballot? Let them exercise that right. Let them have the opportunity to participate. Maybe some people in a major political party might learn some things. And sometimes we get blinders on and we see very narrow perspectives. And having someone having the ability to easily put themselves on a primary ballot may make the system much more richer experience for everyone. I don't like hurdles to participate in a democracy. Senator Westlin, what did you think of my comments about the descending order on a ballot?
Senator Westlin.
Mr. Chair, Senator Limmer, that's what one of my, I had a note here, and it was a little hard for me to understand which part it related to. So this is only for the primary ballot. The alternating order that we passed earlier was only related to the general election ballot. And what this does, again, is for those who've gone through an endorsement process and are endorsed, they're listed first. And then the party chair would indicate anyone who received the 30% vote threshold at the convention in descending order from somebody got 40%, 35, 30. So this is different than the alternating names on the general election ballot. This is for the primary only.
Well, Mr. Chair.
Senator Limmer, follow up.
I didn't ask for clarification. I asked, how do you justify an ordered ballot with candidates on it versus what we passed as a committee of alternating candidates? I was convinced by the argument that an alternating order on a general ballot was appropriate. Why would it not be appropriate in a primary ballot? I just don't understand the ability to favor a candidate in a primary when we decided not to favor any candidates by putting them in alternate order earlier this year in the general ballot. Just a rhetorical statement, Mr. Chair. I just don't understand the logic of that one.
Next, Senator Port.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Westlin, thank you for bringing this bill. I think it is more elegant, a more elegant solution than just raising the threshold. It is more sort of small d democratic. I like the fact that it encourages the grassroots party building side, which for me is the core of what makes good politics. I also think it's helpful for us to put into statute sort of these at least sort of bare bones minimums of what is required of parties, so that as we continue to get, new parties that will continue, I think in Minnesota, in our populous state, to like grow here, to give guidelines of like, this is what you should be working towards. This is the infrastructure you need to put in place in order to, once you are a major party, you'll need to be able to do these things. So I really appreciate that piece of it. I also think, to Senator Limmer's point about the names on the ballot, I think we do value people who have gone through the process and gotten the endorsement. I think that is a thing that around this table we have said we value. And so to me, it makes sense to put that person first on the primary ballot because they have, sort of checked off the most boxes. And so I appreciate that. I will also say thank you for the amendment to this, because I have much more comfort with this language after sort of 1.3 through 1.8. I think, to Senator Limmer's point, we cannot always control who is the party chair and what they, what their loyalties are. I think it's important that we require that the party chairs do what we have laid out in this, that it's not optional based on the feelings of the party chair. If someone meets these thresholds, this is the process and it has to be done. So I appreciate that as well. I also think that this encourages people to go through the endorsement process. It is harder. We've heard from folks who had to get petitions. It's harder to go through that process. And I actually think it's a really good idea to look into the electronic signatures particularly for Greater Minnesota, I think that is a way for people to participate in a way that right now is really hard. But I think it encourages people to participate in endorsement processes, which helps us get candidates who are more vetted. It's important, I think, for you to have to stand up in front of your community and answer questions and go through the endorsement process and talk to voters. I think that's how we get better candidates. I think that's how we get candidates willing to engage with each other and debate, and how we get our community more engaged. So to that point, I think that this bill really moves all of that forward. And to the last point I want to make is, well, all of this, the certification by the party chair, all that comes after the voters have had their choice, right? It's after the endorsement process. And so I like that we have sort of put at the top the voters' voices, the grassroots party building requirements, and then there's the certification by a party chair. So we really do get the voice of the voters first. And finally, I will say, democracy is hard. It's messy and it's hard. Voting should be easy. It should be super easy to vote. But being a candidate is not the same. You should have to prove that you are willing to do the work, that you are engaged in your community, that you stand for the values that you say you stand for. I think getting on a ballot is not something that should be super easy. You should have to show up in your community and be connected. And I think that this gives a real way for people who are willing to do that in their community work to get on the ballot. But then at the end of the day, voting for them is the part that should be incredibly easy. So thank you, Senator Westlin. I think this is a really elegant solution. I look forward to continuing this conversation as it moves through the process.
Senator Westlin, any comment?
Just brief comments. First of all, thank you. Thank you for the discussion. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for hearing this bill today. I think this is a good bill. I think that this is something that, as I've stated already, and as was so eloquently stated by Senator Port, we're talking about people who want to run as a major party candidate. And what should that person have to do in order to run as a candidate for a party? And I think the parties have their own rules that they say, if you want to be our candidate, here's the process you could go through. It's an endorsement process. It's a grassroots process. It starts at the caucuses. It starts with meeting neighbors. It goes to an endorsing convention. But you know what? If you don't do that, we still have a way for you to say, but you know what? I'm a Democrat. I'm a Republican. I don't really want to go through that process. Okay, we have another process for you to go through. And also, and finally, anyone still can go plunk down their $100 and get on the ballot. You just can't do that and get on the ballot as a Republican or a Democrat or any other major party. You can still just file. But we're saying, if you want to represent to the community that you are a member of a party that holds certain values and platforms, you go through a process of vetting. And so I'm glad that we're laying this bill over. Again, I appreciate the thoughtful conversation today. I am certainly happy to continue to have conversations if there are things that we can do to make this a better bill. We've been working on it as I find these things go. There's always tweaks. The lawyer in me doesn't like that.
Senator Westlin, we still have some questions too.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. When you came to me, I thought we were done.
No, not yet.
Oh, gee.
Senator Matthews.
Oh, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Westlin. So I need to finish the discussion that Senator Cran and Senator Limmer have started. Because I have read the bill much the same way. This to me reads like it's empowering the party bosses, not the grassroots, despite all the statements made today. So let me get to the final conclusion that we didn't quite get to previously. The bill says, and you clarified with your amendments, the chair party must, but a bill or a law is only as good as its enforcement. So what's the enforcement mechanism for ensuring that a state party chair does his must, and what's the recourse if that action still does not happen?
Senator Westlin.
Mr. Chair, Senator Matthews, I assume, again, that every party has rules that have to be followed within the party. I would assume also that there are records kept about conventions and what the votes were. There's a paper trail of what happened. If a candidate reached the 30% threshold, I'm going to assume this isn't going to happen to endorsed candidates because I think there's certainly a lot more publicity about who got the endorsement at a convention. I think it would be much harder for a chair not to certify that. But let's just say somebody has reached the 30% threshold. The record from the convention shows that. This requires it to happen, and I assume that the recourse for a candidate who's being denied that certification is probably going to be the same recourse that anyone would have in a situation, which is they would have to probably bring some sort of a lawsuit that the chair has not complied with the law. But I think the law is very clear that it says that the chair must certify and must provide a letter of certification. So, I mean, I'm not sure how much stronger language we can put in there, but there would certainly be records from an endorsing convention on balloting. So I think it would be very difficult for a chair to subvert that process. And I guess my editorial on that is I think there are bigger problems if you've got a chair that's subverting the process in a party.
Senator Matthews, follow up.
Mr. Chair, could I ask counsel maybe, is there any other statute that ties to this that would be any type of enforcement?
Ms. Stengel.
Mr. Chair and members, I think the appropriate remedy would be an errors and omissions petition. That's found in 204B.44. It allows any individual to file a petition with the court for a correction of an error, omission, or wrongful act which has occurred or is about to occur. And it specifically includes any wrongful act, omission, or error of a variety of people or any other individual charged with any duty concerning an election. So it seems that somebody that should have received a certification or should be placed on the ballot and wasn't can file an errors and omissions petition with the court and have it remedied that way.
Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Comments were made earlier about that this isn't interfering with the party process, but to me, it reads like it does. Because the party process has been outside of statute. The parties do what the parties do, and the candidates come and file, and that's when it becomes the statutory requirements of when you've transferred from the party, the grassroots, the caucus, the conventions, all of those things, to the legal, getting my name on the ballot, being a recognized candidate under Minnesota law, having my physical name printed on the actual ballots going to the polling places. And this is now kind of going halfway now. There's some kind of party process that now is the threshold to be met to let your name get on that ballot. And so I struggle with this. If the stated problem is spoiler candidates, I have seen both sides that have had true spoiler candidates hit a 30% threshold. Spoiler candidates could meet 500 signatures or 1,000 signatures or whatever office that they're running for. I don't see this dealing with the problem at hand of keeping spoiler candidates out unless you're going to empower party bosses at the expense of the people. And if this isn't really going to be effective to keep spoilers off of ballots, then why the heck are we meddling in the party process to begin with? Why is the current way that we run our elections insufficient to keep solving the problems? To me, the election is the filter that clears all of this out. The reason why there aren't a zillion spoiler candidates that just sign up and file every year is because you don't win. You largely, with maybe you can find one or two examples that are the anomalies over decades of elections, but if you go and just plop your $100 down and want to get your name on a ballot, you'll get your 50 votes, your 150 votes, your handful. But the voters filter out who are the serious candidates and who are the spoiler candidates, not the party chair. And so I still don't see a good enough reason as to why we're here with this bill in the first place. Because I don't see the party chair's jurisdiction as to be the filter to determine who are legitimate candidates and who are spoiler candidates. I believe that's the voters. And if the goal is spoiler candidates, I can point to examples in both parties where someone that is not aligned with the true intent of that political party still could easily meet alternate thresholds in here and still get on the ballot regardless. So I know why, I think I know why you've been bringing this bill, and I'm sure you're sincere about it. I still am not reading it the same way you are and don't see that this is actually accomplishing the stated purpose. I see it kind of putting into statute certain party, now we're going to have get the party endorsement as a requirement, or figure out a 30% margin is now a statutory qualification to get certified to get on the ballot. And I think that's starting to intertwine with the grassroots party politics that should be left alone. So that's my comment at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, if I could just briefly respond.
Senator Westlin.
So one of the challenges with spoilers, especially spoilers who are filing under a third party that has achieved third party, major party status, one of the challenges is we've certainly had people who file to run under that third party, and that third party doesn't hold conventions, they don't go through an endorsing process, they don't have caucuses, they haven't done any party building. They've met the threshold to be a major party, but they aren't doing any of those other things. And so the spoiler issue arises in those situations in particular, where a candidate says, I'm going to just go plunk my money down, I'm going to run as a pot party candidate of some sort or another, and that party does not have their own process in place currently. So when we're talking about party billing, what this is saying is, if you have achieved major party status, you need to have an infrastructure, you need to have a caucus, you need to have a convention, you need to go through a process, and any candidate then who wants to run under that party's banner has to be certified by the party chair as a legit candidate of that party. And as we know, that is one of the most recent examples where someone has run under a third party banner, but that party exists and it's met a threshold, but they don't have any of the trappings of a party. They don't have the infrastructure of a party. So we may need to agree to disagree on this, and I'm certainly happy to continue conversations, but I just wanted to sort of clarify what the spoiler issue is.
Senator Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to start with your last comment, but I've got a few other ones too. The spoiler, when you talked about pot party kind of thing, I don't see how this bill corrects that at all. But you and I talked offline yesterday, and I think you're going a direction that I want to go, but this isn't quite there yet. A couple of my questions are, if we're talking about spoilers within a party, this bill still allows for a spoiler within a party. It makes it a little more difficult, but you can still get that spoiler. Right now, somebody wins an endorsement, one of the challengers can just file $100 and get on the primary ballot. So this bill takes that away, that avenue away. But you could still go get your signature requirements, never participate in there, and once you're in the primary, we still have an open primary system. So until you close the primary, you're never going to actually address the spoiler within the party system. But the reason I wanted, that's just some initial about this bill, but I had some other things that were brought up earlier by Mr. Tagan and Mr. Johnson. I was wondering, I see Ms. Freeman's in the audience. Could I ask Ms. Freeman to come up for a couple of questions, please?
Senator Barr, Ms. Freeman.
Sorry to put you on the spot here, but
Please take your spot and introduce yourself and Senator Barr, your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nicole Freeman, Office of the Secretary of State.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Ms. Freeman, it's been mentioned earlier about getting the signatures and everything. So I'm just going to run the whole thing and then at once instead of a series of back and forth. So right now you have to go out, get signatures on a specific size piece of paper, submit them to the Secretary of State's office. Secretary of State has to certify that these are all people inside a district, eligible to vote, registered voters. I mean, there's a whole criteria that you have to run down. And then you can go back, you'll start scratching off some of them because there's always bad signatures in there, I'm sure. So you're going to eliminate these, and then you go back and say, oh, you've got enough or you don't have enough. You can put your name on the general election ballot. Is that correct so far?
Ms. Freeman.
Mr. Chair and Senator Barr, that is correct for minor party petitions, yes.
Okay.
Senator Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what would it take, we're going to deal like future elections, what would it take to open a system for the Secretary of State's office to have an electronic system where a minor party candidate could actually take like an iPad and go door to door, or have a system, the Secretary of State, even better, Secretary of State's office has a system where minor party, non-affiliated, anybody who wants to sign a petition could actually log in, and you could verify that voter in district, et cetera, via address, personal information, immediately at the time, and then they could sign the petition. That would kind of eliminate your verifying, kind of combine the verification of the person within their district, so that minor party candidates could, say, for example, run a media campaign and say, I want my name on the ballot in November. I'm an unaffiliated candidate running as an independent. Here's my values. Go to the Secretary of State's go to this website, log in. If you're a registered voter, sign my petition to get my name on the ballot. What would it take for the Secretary of State's office to develop some kind of infrastructure or digital media, digital infrastructure to make that happen?
Ms. Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Barr. I haven't looked at, and I know that I would have to ask our elections development team. I haven't looked at or done any research on if it exists across the country for other examples or things like that. So I can get back to you with that, but I don't have that answer right now.
Senator Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that, Ms. Freeman. If you could come get back to me sometime, I don't know, a couple weeks, whatever. It's obviously not going to be a big hurry because we're kind of a little late to be moving anything this session. But I think that if we could develop something around that, or what we would need to do, that the minor parties or the non-affiliated, independent, truly independent candidates could get to that point. And while we're kind of on that subject, what would it take for us to have a closed primary?
Ms. Freeman.
Logistically or?
Logistically, from Secretary of State's point of view.
The legislature would need to pass laws to do that.
Senator Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You'd obviously have to put some kind of mark on every registered voter, and I mean, that's kind of what I'm getting. What would the Secretary of State's office, if we passed a law to close the primary, you must be affiliated with. I've got family outside of the state, and a lot of states have a closed primary. My brother-in-law actually is registered as an independent candidate. He can't participate in any primaries because he is registered as an independent. So my question is basically around what we'd have to have an election, or would we have to re-register everybody so that the Secretary of State's office could say, you belong in this party, you belong in this party, you're non-affiliated, some of those kind of things. What kind of logistical hurdles would we need to write into law to close a primary?
Ms. Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Barr. I don't know that off the top of my head. I haven't looked at what other states have had to do, and would have to. I'm not trying to avoid the question. I think you're right about party requiring party affiliation and things like that, but I'm not sure what mechanisms other states have used or what their rules might be and what our options are, because I haven't looked at that.
Senator Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you add that to the list? We'll talk about offline. I'd really appreciate that.
Sure.
And then just a final closing comment. So Senator Westlin, until we close a primary, all of the other things that we're doing here you can still put a spoiler into a party ballot, into a primary ballot. So if the primary isn't closed, you will always be able to get a spoiler in there. So just something to look at going forward. But I'm one of those, I believe in the endorsement process. That's how you build your support, your grassroots from the bottom up. So from that perspective, I really prefer endorsed candidates only. And if you want to still put your name on the ballot, you should be you should not be able to run under somebody else's banner. That's just a personal opinion, but I like the direction you're going, but I think there's some vetting to do yet. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Barr. Next, I have Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Westlin, I'm curious to know if this language has been vetted with the party chairs for the Democrat, the Republican, or was this language something of your own making?
Senator Westlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Anderson, as I mentioned at the top of this, when we heard the major party bill that simply raised the threshold to 10%, there was a lot of concern in the room about doing that. I heard certainly feedback from committee members, from testifiers, and we have been looking at, so what would be a better alternative? We have worked with a variety of folks. I don't know if I can speak with certainty about whether or not the chair of your party has weighed in on this. I've heard through second or third hand an answer, but I don't know that I could speak to that. My understanding is that the party chairs for both parties like this, but I can't verify that. And again, I think one of the reasons why this is a preferred proposal, and we've certainly heard from folks who are representatives for other parties, I think that this promotes democracy. I think it does provide access to the ballot through alternate means, but I think it also requires candidates who want to run as a candidate for a party to go through some type of a vetting process. And so my understanding is it seems to me that there's some support amongst multiple parties, Senator Anderson.
Senator Anderson.
Thank you. So, Senator Westlin, you haven't contacted, or they haven't contacted you about this language, the party chair for the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. You've not contacted them to say, do you like my bill or don't you like my bill? Or because they're the ones that are going to be making the final decision on certifying according to this language that you're putting forward. So it would be, to me, it would make sense to have those two individuals who are the major party here and up until a couple elections ago, we had another party, but, or two other parties. But anyway, I just kind of curious that you didn't, or they haven't contacted you about this to be a part of the equation and part of the conversation.
Mr. Chair, Senator Anderson, that's a little bit different question, so I will tell you I have had conversations. This language has been provided to the chair of my party and their staff. This language has been provided to members of the other body on the Elections Committee. We have been providing this language to the Secretary of State's office. I believe the Secretary of State's office is then also reaching out to the counties and other folks. So there's a network of people who have had access to this, and as people are reading the language that's been proposed, if they have had questions or concerns, we've been trying to address those. There have been some changes to the bill that have come through based on feedback from the Secretary of State. I have not had a conversation personally with the chair of the Republican Party. Again, I know third hand, my understanding is that this language or this concept has been presented to him by the chair of my party, and my understanding is that he is generally supportive of it, but I haven't had that firsthand conversation, so I'm hedging a little bit to speak for Mr. Hann. But we have tried to circulate this as far and wide as possible to try to get as much input as possible so that the language addresses what we're attempting to do and incorporates suggestions that will make this a better bill.
Senator Anderson, follow up. Senator Limmer.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I had the same concern that Senator Anderson had regarding whether or not party chairs had gotten wind of this bill and had they given any kind of endorsement of it. But having said that, I would advise state party chairs maybe to consult their state central committee and get direction from the people that were elected to that to give them advice and not go solo on an important issue like this. The other question I had was with the state government bill, which has a significant part of elections policy in it, coming up tomorrow. Senator Westlin, should we anticipate a form of this as an amendment for tomorrow's debate?
Senator
Mr.
Westlin.
Chair, I would say that's a good possibility, yes.
All right. So Mr. Chair.
Senator Limmer.
Question of process. We have a hearing today. The last couple days, we had gotten a message from your office saying it was an informational hearing. Then it was not an informational hearing. Now we're back to the informational hearing. This committee has not given a recommendation for the Senate to consider. So this will just be an amendment of a very significant bill to change our election process. And so without action by this committee, I guess the Senate body will just have to put their finger in the air and consider it and vote on it. Is that your intent, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Senator Limmer, I'd have to say honestly that we did want to gather information, and I think that's what primarily we have done this morning. There has been, and just to respond a little bit on the immediacy or the changes, we have been getting lots of input. Some of it from your party, some of it from our own party, some of it from the Secretary of State to try to make something that makes sense. And you've heard the term elegant. We've been asked for a more elegant solution. We did have the change from 5% to 10%, and that was not received as an elegant solution. So we're looking for something that was a little bit better, but I think the objective was for both parties to avoid having the the incidence of spoilers. And, it is a balance between giving the chairs of the parties more power and the people who show up more power. And I think we've come to that point where we have some increase in both of those, but a decrease in the people who are just trying to go around all of the controls that we have. I personally do like it that we have some power given to the party chairs. Those are people that are elected by us as well. And they're elected by the people that want to be able to choose their own candidate. So it is, we're not always, like you say, satisfied with our chair, but I think we have that process that we try to find the person who is most fair and also most dedicated to our party platforms and values. So I don't think we can find one person that's any more dedicated to that than the party chair, if that helps to answer.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the U.S. Constitution doesn't require elegance to run our democracy. Quite often, it isn't elegant. And quite often, elegance is not the thing we should pursue. Oftentimes, we need a bold statement, we need a bold process, and lay it all out in front of the public. Because ultimately, that's where the power resides, not in the hands of a party chair. I take this hearing as a practice run for the debate tomorrow. And quite honestly, we aired it out pretty well, but not getting a recommendation from this committee really didn't give the public an opportunity. If there was a real decision, we might have had a few more people come and give testimony here. So I don't know if we've really heard from the public of what we want. You just admitted that there's been communication with party chairs, and I find that to be troubling because at least, well, I'll ask the general question, and I don't need an answer, but how many party chairs called the members of this committee to give them their reaction to this bill? I, for one, have not received a single call. So that is telling me the priority of importance that party chairs are giving this particular issue.
Thank you, Senator Limmer. Senator Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Westlin, I appreciate your honesty when asked the direct question. You're bringing this to the floor tomorrow. Mr. Chair, I asked you the very same question when we started this process as Mr. Limmer did, or Senator Limmer, and you failed to answer that, or you said, we have no idea what the path is. The path is very clear. I think the intent is to clean this process up. I don't think it does much of that, and it puts it in the hands. Senator Westlin, I think you said you didn't consult with the Republican state, or the state party chair, the Republican, David Ham. And so I'm not sure who you were seeking all the Republican communication from, but it wasn't from anybody I'm aware of in formulation of this bill. But I can envision what will happen is if my party chair acts out and does what I think will likely happen, it'll cause great problems and we'll take action. If your party chair acts where I think what will happen is that they'll dictate, right? There's no punitive actions in here. They must certify. They will certify the candidate they choose, regardless of the endorsement process. Would that create conflict? Yeah. But what's the recourse for a candidate in that environment, or even the grassroots, is nothing. It would be left up to them in the court systems, which they won't act upon it, and the party would drain them of their resources attempting to fight that in the courts. And so I think that's, run out the clock, and that's likely a good possibility, because we get it, it's ruthless, and it can be, and that overrides a grassroots effort in every single way, shape, and form. To bring this forward, and that there's some urgency. There's no urgency except to exclude a bunch of people in the grassroots effort and then consolidate power to a single person, even though that person is elected by the state central delegate body. So I would hope that this is held off for another day and there's actually true collaborative input, because so far I don't see any bipartisan input into the bill from the perspective prior to this hearing. We had plenty of time. If this is urgent, we came into session January 3rd, and we had plenty of opportunity to put this through a variety of vetting and actual communications. It's rushed. I get it. You wanted to have some formal hearing to justify bringing it tomorrow, but I think it's not ready for prime time. Senator Westlin, I do appreciate your honesty when asked exactly what the intention is and when you're going to move this forward tomorrow. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Grant. Senator Westlin, last word.
I get the last word again. I guess I jumped the gun. It's always good to have the last word. I'm not going to probably belabor this. I guess in response to Senator Curran's most recent remarks, though, what's to say a party chair can't do all those nefarious things now? I don't think that there's something unique to this process, and I do think that those of us who are members of a party and participate in that process, we hold our people accountable. And, you know, it's up to us to do that. So in any event, I have come to this with sincerity. I have come to this really wanting to try to provide a better solution to a problem that, at least from my perspective, we had identified. I wanted to come to this committee with something that was responsive to the hearing we had previously. And I had hopes for bipartisan support. I think we have support from other parties. And I hope that at some point I might convince or cajole you into supporting this measure. But if you have ideas that can make this better, I have said this all along. Every time I've presented a bill, come talk to me. Let's go through the language, point out where we can make some changes that will make this better. I say that with sincerity. I do believe this is a good bill, and I guess if I do offer it as an amendment tomorrow, I guess people will either vote it up or they'll vote it down. But I hope that if you have any questions, you'll come to me first, and maybe we can reach a consensus. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Westlin. And with that, we have no more business, and we are supposed to be on the floor in 10 minutes. I believe that's correct. Yeah. And we will be laying this on the table. With that, we are adjourned.